Everyone. Can't wait to see all the new and upcoming technologies that will connect us to the rest of humanity, the rest of the world, and especially for me to understand more of all the things that my wife has been telling me. So looking forward to that one the most. Apple, you're in there. We're going to work on that one. So everybody, now that we've heard about connectivity, there's so much going on, especially in Asia, in terms of e-commerce, and everybody being super connected, buying all the time. But can you imagine that there's so many people out there in the world, especially in this region as well, that are not online? You know, the gulf between people that are shopping and people that are completely missing out is widening. And I think, how do we address that critical question? How do we bridge so that no consumers are left behind? And I think we have a very interesting panel up next that have amazingly strong consumer bases, both on and offline. And here in this conversation will be led by Campaign's Jenny Chan to discuss the best ways to get to know our customers. And also, please do welcome C Group's Chief Strategy Officer, Alan Hallowell, RGA Chief Marketing Officer, Daniel Diaz, CEO of Guests in Greater China, Jose Blanco, and Amy Bhakti Chowdhury, founder of AnswerLab. So, amazing panel. Give it away for them. Round of applause.
There was room. Look, it's sort of room. Yes, this furniture knows your preferences very well, knows you. So we are about knowing customers, how to really know your customers. May I ask the audience to put yourself in a customer's shoe, no matter what industry you are. How many of you has ever felt that a brand targeting you really intimately knows you? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, that's exactly the point we're trying to make. Only 4 people in the audience really feels that, brands are doing a good job at knowing their customers. And that really brings us to one of the biggest problems when we want to talk about the holy grail of omnichannel, O2O, is data collection, consumer data. Alan just told me that certain markets, there are abundance of online data, and certain markets, there are virtually no offline data. So it really makes it a really difficult job for a business, a brand, a client to sort of bridge that offline to online marketing. Am I right, Alan? Can you tell me what's the situation in Southeast Asia where you specialize in?
Sure. So we at C Group operate the region's largest e-commerce platform called Shopee, and we operate in 7 different markets. Most of our markets have an e-commerce penetration rate of 2%. So 98% of all retail is still done from a neighborhood kiosk. And so we have well over 2 million merchants, the vast majority of whom we would describe as C2C or mom and pop enterprises. And almost invariably, if they come from offline, their database is usually written on the back of an envelope, or at its most sophisticated is an Excel spreadsheet. And so one of the greatest value adds that Shopee brings to the C2C SME merchant is the ability to aggregate and analyze and apply that data. And if I think of the years that I've been covering the internet space, which date back to 1995, and I reflect on kind of the leapfrog moments of markets, particularly China, going from 0 to 60 in e-commerce, I feel like Southeast Asia is really on the cusp of that, and it's really data that is going to drive it all. But the problem is most of our merchants don't understand data. And so the single greatest onus we have to deal with is educating them. Educating them not just in Excel, but in CRM databases, et cetera. So we feel that once we empower them, they'll really enter the modern digital age. And once they have, they almost invariably, in moving from serving people just in their neighborhood to serving all 17,000 islands in Indonesia, they tend to grow anywhere from 50 to 100 times in their first year. So the import and the impact of data is very difficult to overemphasize.
Jose, how about the situation in China? And you've just embarked on a project to really bridge online and offline consumer data in the fashion space. Is
Yes.
that difficult?
What we have done is like, because Guess is a lifestyle brand, no? So what we are trying to do is like identify any interaction with a customer, any point of interaction, no matter which one. It can be an input or an output. This means that we bring the omni-channel level not only to online or offline from a sales perspective, but also from any other angle. So this means marketing, traditional marketing, digital marketing, social media, social CRM, communication with the landlords, the physical stores, the communication we have one-to-one with our customers, online stores, etc. And when we are saying that everything can be an input or an output, this gives us an interaction model in which we can keep exploring this interaction with our customers. Now, and this is very important in order to identify the omni-channel approach.
I like your input and output sort of approach. Really makes me think of you applying systems thinking into marketing and then communicating with consumers. So Daniel, you also have I think RG has a very systematic approach in helping clients know consumers. Are there any sort of prototyping that you have done recently for clients?
What we were talking about before is sort of the RG's approach to content and how we actually reach our consumer. And so we talk about our creating content from a systems and stories point of view. So for us, combining those two talents, so systematic thinkers are people who tend to be sort of maximalists, right? So it's how many more features and things can I actually add to this to make it more interesting, more valuable? Creative storytellers tend to be very reductionist in their thinking, and so they try to whittle things down to the most simple message you possibly can get. And so when you combine those two things, whether you're describing, creating a retail platform or content that's sort of an extension of that, those two things for us become really, really important to get that balance between those two. I mean, just getting back to what you were saying, though, I mean, on the data side of things, if you're not a retailer, that there's a huge abyss when it comes to actually being able to capture that data. So if you're a manufacturer, if you're P&G and Unilever, how are you capturing all that data from those mom and pop shops? Where I mean, it's completely lost to them. So if they're not with a major retailer, how are they, besides sort of the distribution network that they have, when they want to get down to that really granular data, that's completely missing for them. And so the solutions that what we're looking at, especially around our startup and ventures programs, are really trying to find solutions that enable those offline purchases to be captured so that manufacturers can begin to get really granular data on who's buying it, when they're buying it, and even when they're buying it. So one of them was, we have this young company called Snapcart, which is here in Southeast Asia, and they were part of our accelerator program around retail, and they have a really interesting solution, and it's sort of low-tech, high-tech, right? So you snap a photo of the receipt, you sign up for an account, you give them your information. I'm Daniel, I'm this old, I'm married, and I live here, and I just start taking pictures of my receipts and submitting them. You get rewards for doing that, and the manufacturers now have a pipeline of data to better understand, again, who's buying my products, why, and I can begin to develop not only innovations on the product side, but better understand how to communicate with consumers at the right moment so I can drive more of those sales.
Thank you, Dan. That's actually a really good point, and actually fits Tara's question on the Slido. Everybody feel free to submit questions on Slido. So Tara is asking, how do we address the fact that offline consumers, mom and pop shops and emerging markets, are often undervalued because of a financial disadvantage? They can't afford to get online, e-commerce penetration 2% in certain markets. How do we as brands and businesses reprioritize these customers to add real value? Amy, would you?
Sure. Well, so, the place where AnswerLab plays in all of this is helping these major companies who've been dealing with large volumes of data over and over again, really bring it back down to those micro moments and the small piece of data to understand what's really a customer's experience day in and day out. And so we go into people's homes and their offices, and we watch them for long periods of time, maybe 4 hours or half a day. And we understand, say, on the retail side, what does that experience now look like from the customer, all of the different touch points they've had. We follow them over time as they've ordered products as well and understand what that experience is. So when we think back to really monetizing these groups, when you can get down to the very, very essence of what an experience is, and you can start to create a story around that for a customer, then that allows you to create empathy in your organization for those individuals and what the brand can do for those individuals. So it's back to storytelling for us and trying to bring those individuals to life. So to the point here of how do we help brands understand how to value those customers, it's bringing their stories to them.
There are huge segments of the population on the younger side and then on the older side that do a lot more offline, and even when they are engaged in digital, it's often not mobile, and it's often for a very specific set of services. So we're missing out. I mean, in the U.S., which is different than here, but in the U.S., I think you think about children and their free time, 30% of it is spent in front of a screen, and then 70% of free time is spent doing activities that are not digital at all. And they're major drivers of purchase decisions within their house. And then on the other side, boomers, so the older generation, anybody over than 50, you have, I think, only 75% of them, which is a lot, but I mean, you own a smartphone. Or a cell phone. So you have 25% of an aging population that's not engaged in any way. So how do we begin to engage with them and drive purchases and drive behavior, but then also capture the data on the backside of that?
Yes, related with that is what we are trying to do is like identify how the offline customers are acting online, no? And it's mainly through the mobile, no? So at the end, we are going to localization services in which we can understand what they are doing or when they are coming to the stores in order to interact with them, no? And bring them not only from a pure offline approach, but also what they are doing online. And from there, you come back to the interaction with the customer.
There are ways out there to capture data from these consumers that are not engaging with you digitally. If you look at the massive sign in Piccadilly in London, I mean, there's a whole bunch of data collection that's going on, and then the sign becomes much more interactive with them. So if reading what they're doing, what they're driving, and then being able to tailor messaging to them specifically. And I mean, you're seeing that all the way down through into the retail stores as well, as they begin to interact with, things like Oak Labs and their mirrors that they've created and different things, sort of capture data and consumer insight, and then immediately feed it back to them so you can drive behavior.
Correct. Yeah, we are doing the same even to understand how we have to merchandise the store, the product that we have to put in the store, based on the kind of population that it's using mobile nearby the shopping mall.
But the retail space is an incredible opportunity to educate those consumers on how they could interact with you digitally or through mobile. Because if you can start to create the right experiences in the store, it can lead to more comfortable behavior online or through mobile as well.
I mean, adding to a point that you made, Daniel, just now about there could be certain type of disconnect between the offline and online. For example, in China, I do know for certain categories like maybe healthcare or luxury, the online purchases that for these categories are actually not for those, say, millennial types who are buying those stuff online. Might be for their elderly parents back at home in the third-tier cities. But then those data is not collected because you're only collecting the first line of purchase. So there is sort of many layers of consumer data that we're talking about, and then we can address Jesse's question. Any really good tools for consumer journey mapping when it's so complicated in certain markets, according to the scenario that I just cited?
Well, sorry, I was reading the other question that it was for about the input-output approach.
Oh, you want to? Okay, yeah.
And I was thinking about that one.
Right.
One example about input-output, that is one of my, the way of doing things. For instance, you are doing a live streaming video with a KOL, and because of the KOL, of course, you are getting a huge exposure. It can be like, 1 million viewers, no? For a specific period of time, like 1 hour. And this 1 million viewer by itself is there and is going to go. So you have to do something with them in order to get back this customer. So what we are doing is like identify which one of the 1 million followers are really engaging during the live stream video in order to create a one-to-one communication. And from there, we bring to our sales strategy to see what we can do with them or what we can do for them. This can bring you maybe from the 1 million 30K customers conversion rate, but even though it's really worthy. So at the end, it's like what you have to see is like how you go from the original approach to the solution, and then back. Now you have another 30K new customers. You have engaged with them through a sales transaction in which you are going to provide them much more information, not only about this KOL, but also about the brand.
Okay, and what kind of tagging, like what kind of system do you have to actually record each interaction and use it as an input? Say 30K people interacted with this KOL, and then how do you actually use it? How do you what lessons do you learn?
From one side is that you are using the different tools that the platforms are giving to you in order to get interaction, and of course at the end we will have our CRM customer base in which we are collecting the information from all these different channels, and we are doing different segments of customers based on where they are coming from, offline stores, online stores for this specific campaign, from our social media account, etc.
Okay, Alan, in markets where you don't have actually that much resources, smaller businesses, startups, you can't do something like what Guess is doing. Your clients. There's a lot of friction in actually using this data, gathering offline and online data. What is the interim solution right now?
Well, we're learning to walk before we run, or we're assisting both the customer and the merchant to achieve the very basics, which is to grow their GMV, grow their customer bases, and once they've done that, then you can go to the finer points of retargeting a customer, determining that someone hasn't returned for 6 months, and offering them a coupon to redeem as an enticement to come back. But the really amazing thing, I'm going to date myself here, but I was in Silicon Valley in the mid-'90s when we started seeing the first e-commerce platforms come out. And to this day, a lot of the leading Western e-commerce platforms usually have 2 or 3 minutes of user time spent per day. I'm in, I'm out, I finally replaced my Banana Republic shirt, I have nothing to say, done. Yeah. In Southeast Asia and also in China, people come and they undertake an ever-widening number of activities. So Shopee has 22 minutes per user per day in Southeast Asia. Again, our Western counterparts are usually measured 2 to 3. So we are witnessing not just the transaction. We see that person is watching these streaming videos with Adidas soccer player uniforms and various other things. So the data points, we are literally going from 0 to 60, and because the insights are a superset of what you find out about myself when I go on to Amazon in the US. So it is really quite an art to make use of all this information. And if it were a 9-inning baseball game, we very much believe we're still in the first inning of being able to properly leverage that insight in order to continue the customer journey.
Talking about customer journey, most upvoted questions, 7 upvotes. Any good tools for customer journey mapping? And I'm sure, I think what the audience wants, they might want some technical tools, actual practical technical tools.
I can talk a little bit about that. So a lot of the work that we do in spending time with customers results in outputs for clients that helps them understand what the journeys are for interacting with their experiences. So the 2 tools that we use for collecting this kind of information, one is called Revelation, another one is called D-Scout. They allow us to follow a customer over a period of, say, 3 to 4 weeks and gather interactions from them. They'll send us videos, they'll answer direct questions that we have for them, and those collection mechanisms allow us to have way greater understanding than we would have, say, of just looking at behavioral data, right? So the behavioral data, we're going to see a lot of things happening, but we don't know the intent, we don't know the why, we don't know what their impression was. But when we can use these really rich diary tools, we get the whole picture. So we use those, and then we then convert them into our kind of proprietary internal journey mapping tools within the business for then communicating that to clients. But some companies have their own tools that they then take that data and put it into.
When we talk about when the entire journey is mapped out and there we can actually anticipate a consumer's intent, that's the holy grail marketing, right? But how do we then balance this personalization and this intrusion of privacy? How do you ensure that consumers are not overly upset by the way we're collecting data? Daniel, was there a case study?
I think what we were talking about is just sort of really making it very, very clear what the exchange of value is between the customer and the brand. You know, when we saw what happened with Facebook a few months ago, that was because it wasn't because there was. I didn't think it was this big secret about how Facebook was handling data and what was going on there. The whole business model is around collecting data and then using it to push content to certain users. But you know, we probably all live in a bubble on the stage because we're all inside this, you know, this industry. But outside of it, there clearly wasn't an understanding of exactly what was going on there. That's a problem that's really easily avoided when you have a very transparent policy about what is being used here, and there's a really clear exchange of value. I think one of the companies that does this best is Nike. I mean, for us, when we help create Nike Plus and then Nike On Demand, there's a very clear understanding of the data you're giving up to Nike, as you know, they follow your run and so they know when I'm running, how far I'm running, where I'm running. They know the weather. They know all this information. With that, they're now able to offer content to me that is incredibly relevant to how I'm training, what I'm training for. They know my goals, so they collect that. I understand what the exchange of value is there, or the exchange of information is. And then when they serve things back to me, it's really relevant, it's meaningful, it feels like it's specific to me and it's useful at that moment in time. That's the sort of holy grail that you're looking for. If you can do that in any way, shape, or form, I think that's when you begin to have a better relationship with the consumer. And it doesn't feel like they're giving anything up. They're feeling like they're exchanging something for something really valuable to them.
And I'll build on that to say, you know, we had all of the recent activities with GDPR and the mad dash, at least in the US, to make all of the websites really compliant with the GDPR rules coming out of the EU. And it was largely perceived as a headache, a set of regulations and frustrations that companies would have to go to be compliant. But in our research, we found that customers really want to have better control over what information is collected by them. They want simpler tools to be able to manage that. They want notifications of what their information is being collected, and they want all of this done in very layman's terms, not in these very long user agreements with a lot of legalese in it. So GDPR can be a good thing for your brand if you follow the regulations in a way that adds customer value to them.
Correct. It's about adding value to the customer through the information we are collecting from them. If so, they will accept it.
Yeah. And even more basically and fundamentally, I think that there's an evolution in the import and the popular views of data when it is purely an economic lubricant, and in the case of China has taken you from 5% e-commerce penetration to 20%. That's probably a use of data that is very much permitted and even encouraged. And so again, in Southeast Asia, we at Shopee are, you know, we wake up every day to measure how we use data in order to improve this storefront's productivity, et cetera. You know, in markets like the United States, sticking with the e-commerce discussion, we've kind of stalled out at 13%. And so the incremental utility of data is probably more questionable than if you're going from 2% in year one to 4% to 6%. And so I think, you know, we may hit a point out in this part of the world where data privacy becomes a much more sensitive issue. But for all intents and purposes, it's viewed very positively.
When data is used as a utility, there's no better question than, where was the crisis question that was up just now? There was a question about consumers in crisis, say hospitals and can't remember it now. Catherine, if you can pull it up. So that's a very interesting question because that actually addresses the needs of a specific group customers. Yes, how would you map data of customers who are in crisis mode, legal or medical services industry, faces customers who only need them in crisis? So probably the data you have on this type of customers are so sporadic and scattered. I mean, I understand it's very specific industry, but would you have any perhaps learnings from the consumer world we can apply to that?
This is a massive challenge in our market because, again, as an American, I don't take many things for granted, but the awareness that our family practitioner has known my medical records since close to birth and the consistency in my medical care. U.S. healthcare gets criticized for very good reasons, but there are some things that we've perfected. In a lot of our markets, one's medical history is distributed across 14 different emergency rooms, none of which communicate. And I think some of the most fascinating progress is being made in China, again, in ways that I think we in the West are going to strive to in a few years. And that is they're using the popular platforms out here, such as WeChat and some of the other ones, to house all of your x-rays and to unify all of the medical opinions that have been rendered on you. And so it's really, again, just a classic leapfrogging application of technology that I would have to imagine, I sadly don't study it closely enough, is going to address a lot of these crisis situations that we find ourselves in.
Well, and I think the whomever wrote that question was bringing it up from the standpoint of right now that data doesn't sit with the customer, right? The patient doesn't have their medical information residing with them in a way that can be made any sense of, particularly if you've ever moved or you've gone to different doctors. It's disparate, it's all over the place. These companies or these physicians' offices still ask you to fax things around. But if we can change the paradigm to where the customer owns their own data and the customer has tools to analyze their own data and the customer can take that data with them when they go somewhere, then when they're in the crisis mode, they can make that data available so that then the appropriate response can happen.
It seems like then we have a bigger task at hand rather than just collecting data, but more like empowering data, empowering consumers to have ultimate control of their own data. So
for this question, though, I mean, I would look to it's interesting that it's in crisis mode, but it's sort of similar to me to moments in your life that you do things sort of very. What am I trying to say? It's like buying a house. How many times do you buy a home in your life? Maybe 3, 4 times if you're somebody who moves around a lot. Maybe buying a car is a bit quicker, but there are those things in life that you don't do very often, and that's very similar. We map those things really well. You map how people buy apartments. You map how they make large decisions in their life. I would probably think about how mapping those in a similar way, because although it's crisis, it's similar to those sort of very, those moments that don't happen very often.
There's a lot of predictive modeling that goes into this kind of customer mapping, right? Even for hospitals, for houses, even for fashion, you can predict. Obviously, the cycle is much shorter than buying a house. When should you buy a new pair of jeans, Guess jeans, for example?
Yeah, but at the end, you have to map it, no? And at the end, you have to understand that how many times the same customer is coming to the store, how many of these times they are buying or not buying, in order to properly interact with them. No, I think the customer wants to be recognized about this customer journey. No?
So the statement about your point, Daniel, that the more you give value and the more you engage with a consumer, the more willing a certain consumer is willing to give information and data to you, and then it's a positive cycle. Is that always correct? Is there anyone disagreeing with that?
I think it's correct a lot of the time. If you look at Nike and its sort of ecosystem, you look at Apple with its functionally integrated ecosystem, the more I give Apple, the more I buy the products, the more services I use, the more valuable they all become. Amazon is the same way, between Prime and Video, all the things. So the more you surround consumers with things that are really valuable to them, and the more that information exchange makes those things more valuable, I think that is the lubricant for that sort of that interaction, that relationship.
And coming back to the beginning when we were speaking about omnichannel, this is also what we are trying to do in the stores when we are bringing magic mirrors. We are also trying to introduce a 3D scanning fitting room. At the end is how you can collect this information from customers to add more value to the customer, no, through the customer journey.
Yeah, it's that service layer. The more you can add the service layer on top to what you're doing, I think that's where the magic starts to happen, and that's where the data becomes really important. I mean, what we're seeing is that more than anything right now, convenience is the currency for brands. The easier you can make it for them, the more likely you are to start to build a real relationship with them. And the only way you're going to understand how to make things convenient to them is by really parsing that data and figuring out what it is that they need and where those friction points are, and getting them out of the way.
You mentioned a Snapcard case where the consumers encouraged to take photos of their receipts offline, in the offline environment, and then sort of link it back to online. Can you talk to me more about that?
They have an app, but that's basically how they work. So it is offline, online, right? So really it's about capturing that offline data and using an online application or a mobile application to actually capture it. But it allows you to get that moment that doesn't happen within a commerce site and get that data back. But it does require a connection to the digital world. It's not completely offline.
And to the rest of the panelists, when we talk about data, have you had any cases where the data has helped you throw away old perceptions or combat the boardroom bias? You know, data that actually, this is a story, and this is your perception. This is what the data is telling you. This is what we are doing, and is it very hard to get clients or the boardroom to change and act according to what the data tells you about consumers?
In Southeast Asia,
good stories?
Yeah, in Southeast Asia, not unlike a lot of other developing countries, you have obviously a population clustered in the biggest urban areas, and then you have everyone else. And the methodologies that the fine people at Snapcard have been addressing or employing are really challenging the understanding, which is very erroneous oftentimes, of consumer that are very urban-centric. So characterizations are made of the entirety of Indonesia just sampling customers in Jakarta. And they are of a totally different wealth profile, they're completely different behaviors, and so because we're a marketplace and we exist the second you turn on a smartphone, it's platforms that are actually really challenging the popular perception that the average Indonesian makes X thousand dollars a year, parentheses, is probably 0.5x, and that replaces or buys laundry detergent with this frequency. And so there's been a real sea change in the understanding of the customer, simply because the sampling techniques are now much, much broader. It's no longer just Jakarta, it's the other 33 provinces. It's not just Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, it's all the other parts of Vietnam. And so that's just another paradigm shift that everyone is talking about at the boardroom level.
And I'd build on that to say that data by itself, just saying here's some stats, isn't what changes executives or even engineers' minds. They almost have to be taken through an emotional journey, starting with helping them open their eyes to a potential problem and using the right data. So, for example, do you first open someone's eyes to a new story by showing them a video of a customer doing something, and now you can see the customer doing this, and you can believe it because you can see it with your very eyes. And that's opened the door to being willing to hear something more. And then it's, well, now how big is this problem? I've only had a video. And so then the quant data comes in. And then it's, well, okay, we need a new future. Then what does future vision and storyboarding look like? So it's kind of meeting those executives where they are and taking them through a journey to convince them of what the data is showing.
But then you have to take it into sort of one step further and then sort of prototyping, doing those sort of pilot programs, making sure that they understand that it actually works. And then that, for us and the innovation consulting side of our business, when you take it from sort of that visioning through to the actual implementation of the product and showing them that it actually works, that's when the board starts to get excited, and that's when you begin to unlock sort of those innovation budgets to allow you to create the projects at much larger scale.
In our case, what we see with the data is like, okay, we avoid any kind of perception. We can see like our customer base has been double in 1 year time. We can see that our customer base is fashion oriented, that they are not looking for promotions or discounts, and this allows us to reinforce our strategy as a fashion brand.
That's interesting. Do we have time for the government question? How responsible should companies be to ensure data is protected from government entities? Obviously, China has a big hand in WeChat data. India has interfering in PayTM. Obviously, the Facebook Russia is self-explanatory, pretty famous example. How do you actually cooperate with the government without jeopardizing your own business opportunities?
Well, we follow the regulation.
Follow the Yes.
Well, frankly, I think all businesses should be in the business of doing no harm. So don't screw it up.
And
yes, shouldn't play God, shouldn't let the government play God.
Yes. To their great credit, the host governments that we work with are keenly aware of information that may be mission critical. You probably need to have an awareness of who's lending to whom online. If that lendee is an 88-year-old woman who's being defrauded, you probably want information to prevent that kind of behavior. For mainstream e-commerce, we rarely get requests to get any consumer insights, and we shouldn't. And so, I know that it's easy to get very alarmist in terms of what host governments are seeking, but I mean, refreshingly so. They understand what they really need, and I think leading platforms like ourselves are willing to negotiate that, and then stuff that's a nice to have or not need to have, they rarely ask for.
I think it goes back to that transparency and making sure that people understand what data can be given to whom, right? So in the U.S. there's the DNA kits now where you can test your DNA and it can show you.
There's a DNA kit outside there.
So it can show you what your heritage is. And there was a murder case that was solved. It was a serial killer who was caught in the U.S. based on the DNA profiles of the person's relatives who had submitted. And so they were able to pinpoint who this person was through data from a DNA collection site that had nothing to do with the actual person purporting the crimes. Great outcome, but really interesting things to think about how data is being used. And I was surprised that was even possible. So it's about transparency and communication.
Yeah. There was a case in China where a criminal was caught at a Jackie Cheung's concert just by facial recognition, so to that point. But then again, we're going on to a way broader topic that would take another panel to do. So please join me in giving a big hand to our 4 panelists, Jose, Amy, Daniel, and Alan.